Between 1847 and 1852, three prominent plantation families in the Tennessee River Valley of northern Alabama suffered complete ruin. Across these estates, 23 people died from fever, accidents that defied explanation, and other causes the coroner described only as unnatural cessation of vital functions. The common thread binding these tragedies was deliberately hidden for over a century by families desperate to protect their reputations. At the center of every catastrophe stood one woman, Rachel. Before we continue with the story of Rachel, a woman whose intelligence and determination would expose the darkest contradictions of antebellum Alabama, I want to invite you to join our community of truth seekers. Subscribe to the Forgotten Liturgy and hit that notification bell so you never miss these hidden chapters of American history. And please leave a comment telling us what state or city you're listening from. The sequence of ruin began in Limestone County, dominated by three families: the Rutledges, Fairmont, the Havehills, Riverside, and the Crenshaws, Oak Ridge. In April 1847, Samuel Rutledge of Fairmont, driven by mounting gambling debts and financial crisis, attended an estate sale in Mobile. There he purchased a woman named Rachel, approximately 24 years old. She was listed as literate, fluent in French and English, and accomplished in needlework and music. The price was remarkably low, $400, when skilled servants commanded $200, because the sale included an unusual stipulation: the purchaser must take her at least 100 miles from Mobile. The auction agent assured Rutledge it was a mere technicality, and Rutledge saw Rachel as a perfect status symbol to train his daughter, Lydia. When Rachel arrived at Fairmont, she proved exactly as advertised. But by June, the household atmosphere shifted. Rachel began asking innocent-sounding questions about cotton prices, planters' debts, and family vulnerabilities. She quickly assembled a detailed map of the county's power relationships, noticing Samuel's growing gambling debts and Lydia's romantic temperament. On July 14, 1847, Rachel entered Samuel's study and offered him a gift: specific, verifiable, and devastating information about the concealed debts and failed speculations of their neighbor, James Havehill. Samuel, desperate, should have questioned how a house servant possessed such intelligence, but the information was too valuable. He decided to use it to force Havehill into a business arrangement that would solve his crisis. What Samuel didn't understand was that he had just made himself dependent on a woman who had spent 8 years methodically destroying the three families who owned her before the Rutledges, and who had been sold with a distance requirement because Mobile authorities recognized her pattern but lacked the legal grounds to stop her. That night, a severe storm broke over Fairmont, marking the beginning of a sequence of tragedies that would eventually create legal precedents concerning the prosecution of enslaved people for crimes that existing law could barely conceptualize. Samuel Rutledge initiated his plan against Havehill on July 22nd. Using the accurate, specific intelligence provided by Rachel, but sourced from the enslaved network, Rutledge successfully extorted a $3,000 investment from Havehill to solve his debt crisis. Rutledge left convinced he was safe, unaware that Rachel's ultimate goal was conflict. Rachel, meanwhile, began Phase 2 with Lydia Rutledge. She subtly introduced the concept of systemic injustice, drawing parallels between an enslaved person being sold and a planter's daughter being married off to settle debts. She falsely presented speculation about a marriage to the Crenshaw boy as fact, saying, "You are inventory, Miss Lydia. Valuable inventory, but inventory nonetheless." This manipulation created the ideological justification for rebellion in Lydia. By September, Rachel escalated the conflict by informing Samuel that Havehill was spreading rumors about his gambling debts. Rutledge's immediate public confrontation with Havehill at a social meeting shattered both men's reputations, achieving Rachel's objective of mutual destruction. On September 18, 1847, Lydia disappeared from Fairmont, leaving a note filled with radical language about natural rights that Rachel had fed her. The plantation erupted in chaos, with Samuel organizing searches and Catherine collapsing. The enslaved cook, Bess, saw the truth. "Lord, have mercy on the Crenshaw family. That woman carries destruction like a plague." Desperate for capital to fund the search, and with his family in ruins, Samuel accepted an offer from Daniel Crenshaw to purchase Rachel for $900. Rachel was transferred to Oak Ridge on October 3rd, leaving the Rutledge family destroyed. At Oak Ridge, Rachel adapted her strategy. Daniel Crenshaw valued practical competence over feminine accomplishments. Rachel quickly became indispensable through quiet efficiency, managing accounts meticulously, identifying expense reductions, and demonstrating an understanding of agricultural economics. She had destroyed one family. Two more remained, and the most devastating phase of her revenge was about to begin on Daniel Crenshaw, who believed himself immune to manipulation. Within weeks, Daniel Crenshaw was consulting Rachel on matters like crop rotation and market trends beyond household management. This displacement of authority troubled his daughter, Margaret, who possessed a suspicion of Rachel's too-perfect competence. Margaret warned her father, linking Rachel's arrival to the Rutland catastrophe, but Daniel dismissed her concerns as female hysteria. Rachel's strategy for the Crenshaws was complex. She couldn't exploit social insecurities, so she targeted a genuine weakness. Daniel A.S. concealed borrowing to fund a risky purchase of additional bottomland. She knew he needed a cash flow solution. That leverage appeared in January 1848 in the form of James Havill, who was now desperate and offered Daniel a partnership. Rachel seized the opportunity, subtly poisoning Daniel's mind against Havill by claiming, "Mr. Havill destroyed Mr. Rutland through deliberate manipulation." This was a complete reversal of the truth she told Rutland, but it achieved its goal. Daniel rejected the proposal, ensuring three-way hostility among the county's elite. Rachel then exploited the family's greatest internal secret, William Crenshaw's concealed marriage to Anna Pritchard, a woman beneath his social station. Rachel engineered the accidental discovery of Anna's letter by Daniel, resulting in a devastating confrontation. When William revealed the legal marriage and pregnancy, Daniel, consumed by rage, disinherited his son and expelled him from the family. The Crenshaw family was fractured, but Rachel needed external pressure. In March 1848, a New Orleans creditor representative, Josiah Fletcher, appeared, demanding immediate payment of an $8,000 debt, a meeting orchestrated by Rachel through her network. Facing ruin and family collapse, Daniel made a catastrophic decision. He sold 20 enslaved people to pay the debt, tearing families apart. Rachel watched with no visible emotion, having caused the human cost deliberately. Margaret, watching the brutal auction, saw a momentary lapse in Rachel's composure. Not emotion, but calculation. Margaret confronted her directly. "You did this." Rachel met her gaze without flinching, delivering a chilling truth. "To prove that, Miss Margaret, you would need to acknowledge that an enslaved woman outwitted 3 prominent planter families. Do you really believe your pride would allow such admission?" Margaret, knowing the truth but powerless to admit such humiliation, left. Rachel's position was secured. Daniel now depended on the very person engineering his destruction. By mid-1848, the pattern was clear. 3 prominent families, the Rutlands, Crenshaws, and Havills, were all ruined after employing Rachel. Yet Alabama's legal system had no framework for prosecuting a slave for orchestrated social destruction, because she had broken no recognized laws. The devastation was caused by the white men's own decisions. James Havill, now desperate, saw salvation when mobile factor Edmund Fairbanks sought a partnership. Havill mentioned Rachel's unusual competence, leading Fairbanks to visit Oak Ridge. In a private conversation, Rachel revealed specific, damning details about Havill's concealed debts and systematic fraud, successfully convincing Fairbanks that Havill was trying to trap him. The partnership collapsed immediately. Havill's rage was volcanic. Tracing Rachel's ownership back through the Delacroix, Beaumont, and Robichaud families, he found a clear, disturbing pattern. Every family owning Rachel suffered complete destruction within 2 to 3 years. Havill demanded County Sheriff Thomas Yarbrough investigate, but the sheriff stated the core legal problem. "You're asking me to prosecute a piece of property for being smarter than the white men who owned her." A subsequent petition to Judge Horton to have Rachel forcibly removed on grounds of dangerous property was denied. Pushed to catastrophic action, Havill arranged to forcibly abduct Rachel to Texas in September 1848. However, Rachel had anticipated and prepared for the attempt. The abductors were met by armed field workers, resulting in violence and injury. Havill was subsequently charged with attempted theft of property, Crenshaw's slave. The irony was brutal. The man trying to stop the dangerous threat was now the criminal. But Rachel wasn't done. The abduction attempt was a deliberate provocation to expose Havill and set up the final act. For months, Rachel had been cultivating the affection of Samuel Crenshaw, Daniel's youngest and most idealistic son. Samuel, who saw Rachel as a person trapped in an unjust system, was the final mechanism. Rachel had encouraged Samuel's doubts about slavery while presenting herself as a tragic figure, setting the stage for the final sequence of destruction beginning in October 1848. Samuel Crenshaw was deeply in love with Rachel, and she exploited his affection by lying about an impending abduction and murder plot orchestrated by Havill's associates. She convinced Samuel that the only way to save her was to help her escape to a free state. Driven by love and moral conviction, Samuel made arrangements, committing serious crimes in the process. On November 3, 1848, Rachel executed her final devastating betrayal. She informed Daniel of Samuel's plans, presenting herself as the loyal servant who uncovered a plot to destroy the family's honor. She provided detailed, forged evidence, leading Daniel to confront Samuel. The distraught son confessed everything, but Daniel responded by having Samuel committed to a private asylum for mental instability. Daniel then arranged for Rachel's immediate sale to a trader transporting her to the Deep South. As she was chained and taken away on November 8th, Rachel looked back and uttered one chilling sentence. "Everything I did, you made necessary." Rachel was gone, but her reign of terror was not over. She had left a final mechanism in motion. Exactly 15 days after her departure on November 23, 1848, James Havill was found dead in his study at Riverside, an apparent suicide by gunshot. His wife, Margaret Havill, immediately challenged the ruling, citing suspicious wound placement and missing financial documents. Sheriff Yarbrough closed the case as suicide, but Margaret hired private investigator Abraham Cornwall, a former Pinkerton agent. Cornwall's December report was damning. Rachel had systematically destroyed the families through psychological manipulation and strategic intelligence, committing no acts that Alabama law recognizes as crimes. Regarding Havill's death, Cornwall concluded that while he couldn't prove murder, the circumstances suggested careful planning by someone intimately familiar with Havill's habits, regardless of Rachel's physical absence. Margaret brought the report to Judge Horton, but the judge was stymied. The law has no category for what this woman has done. The legal system could not prosecute what it could not define. While Margaret Havill fought her legal battle, the Crenshaw family disintegrated. Samuel was withdrawn in the asylum, and his sister Margaret Crenshaw joined forces with Margaret Havill, petitioning the state legislature to create new statutes against psychological manipulation by enslaved persons. The debate was ongoing when the second death occurred. On January 17, 1849, Daniel Crenshaw was found dead in the cotton gin house, crushed by the machinery. The death was ruled accidental, but Margaret Crenshaw knew it was murder. She reported her suspicion that a former field hand, sold away months earlier and claiming to deliver a message from Rachel's new trader, was involved. The field hand disappeared, and the trader denied any involvement, leaving Yarbrough to reluctantly close the investigation, again finding no evidence of tampering. Sheriff Yarbrough closed the Crenshaw murder investigation with visible frustration, admitting he believed Rachel arranged it but lacked the legal evidence to prove anything beyond suspicion. The two Margarets, Havill and Crenshaw, hired Abraham Cornwall for an exhaustive investigation focused on locating Rachel and finding definitive legal evidence of murder. Cornwall tracked Rachel through 4 quick sales across Mississippi and Arkansas before locating her in Texas, now property of Henry Dalton. Cornwall's 2-hour interview with Rachel was one of the most unsettling experiences of his career. She answered every question with clinical precision, detailing how she studied families, identified vulnerabilities, and used her intelligence network to create plausible deniability while maximizing chaos. When asked if she arranged the deaths, Rachel smiled. "I was hundreds of miles away when both men died. I sent no messages. You cannot prove I did anything because under your law, I can do nothing. I am property. Property has no agency. Property cannot commit crimes. Your legal system created this situation, and now you must live with it." The psychological and legal implications of Cornwall's report led to a heated legislative debate in Alabama, where the profound irony was acknowledged. The legal system faced a crisis because one person, legally powerless, demonstrated superior rationality. The debate was ongoing when the third death occurred. On May 2, 1849, Samuel Crenshaw was found dead in his asylum room, an apparent suicide by hanging. Consumed by grief and rage, Margaret Crenshaw made a desperate decision. She traveled to Texas with a loaded pistol, determined to kill Rachel herself. When she arrived, Rachel was gone, sold again to a trader heading to New Orleans. Margaret tracked her to a widow near Lake Pontchartrain, Ellis de Loqua, the remarried wife of Louis de Loqua, the French Creole planter who owned Rachel before the Rutledges. The circle was complete. When Rachel entered the parlor, she met Margaret's gaze with recognition and sadness, saying quietly, "Miss Crenshaw, I knew someone would eventually come. I did not know it would be you." In a 3-hour conversation, Rachel finally confessed her history. She was born free in Richmond, educated and accomplished. At age 16, her father died, and creditors used manufactured documentation to illegally seize her and her mother as slaves. Her mother died within a year. "I was not born to slavery," Rachel told them. "I was educated to think, and then one day, because white men decided they could steal my freedom, I became property." She described the years of concealed rage, concluding, "I decided that if I could not be free, I would at least make them pay. I would show them that the people they considered property were capable of destroying them completely. I would prove their assumptions of superiority were delusions, and that their power came not from inherent worth, but from legal structures that could not protect them from someone who understood those structures better than they did." Rachel described her methods to Margaret Crenshaw, observing families for months, exploiting their real weaknesses, gambling, financial overextension, betrayals, with strategic precision, and always maintaining plausible deniability. "The beauty of it," Rachel said with pride, "was that I never had to lie. Everything I told each family was true. I simply chose which truths to reveal and when." Regarding the deaths, Rachel was chillingly honest. Daniel Crenshaw's death was her design. She arranged for information to reach creditors and debtors who had reasons to want him dead. Havehill's despair was ensured, leading to his death either by his own hand or another's. But she softened when speaking of Samuel. "I did not intend his death. That was regrettable." The word regrettable fueled Margaret's fury, and she pulled out her pistol. Rachel stood firm, saying Margaret would lose the rest of the story if she pulled the trigger. Elise de Loqua intervened, explaining she purchased Rachel to hear her confession, believing her first husband's destruction was the result of a calculated warfare by an enemy he never acknowledged as human enough to be dangerous. Elise presented Rachel's 80-page confession, a meticulous critique of slavery from a woman who was born free, was educated, and was illegally enslaved. Rachel stated, "I decided that if I could not be free, I would at least make them pay. I would prove their assumptions of superiority were delusions." Rachel challenged Margaret's final action. "If you kill me, you prove the system works. If you let me live, you prove something more disturbing. That you cannot stop someone like me. That slavery contains within itself the seeds of its own destruction." Margaret lowered the pistol, realizing she was confronting a force larger than personal revenge, a demonstration of the fundamental instability of the social order. She decided instead to take the confession to the public, vowing to make every slaveholder know what Rachel had done. Rachel accepted, saying, "If you publicize my methods, you also publicize my humanity, my intelligence, and my moral critique. That proof may be more dangerous to slavery than any violence I could commit." The Alabama legislature created new, vague statutes in 1850 attempting to address psychological manipulation by the enslaved, acknowledging the problem Rachel represented without solving the underlying contradiction. Rachel herself disappeared from historical records after 1850. Margaret Crenshaw devoted her remaining life to documenting Rachel's case. In her 1867 journal, she wrote, "What I cannot reconcile is that I find myself almost admiring her even as I hate her for what she did to my family. She was an enemy of great intelligence and determination, and she won our war completely." Rachel's legacy is captured in her confession. "I chose instead to destroy families completely and visibly." To prove that the people white society considers property are capable of sophisticated resistance that their laws cannot address. I wanted them to fear our minds more than our hands, because they can chain hands, but they cannot chain thought. This mystery shows us that intelligence and determination can be weapons as powerful as any violence. But it also reveals the terrible human cost of systems that deny people their basic humanity. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Rachel's actions were justified resistance or inexcusable destruction? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more hidden chapters of American history like this, subscribe to The Forgotten Liturgy, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries that challenge our understanding of the past.